The wind blew low across the scrub plains, dry and sharp like a whispered warning. Dust coiled through the dying light, painting the horizon with streaks of red and gold. On the edge of that rust-colored dusk, a lone rider moved, slow, deliberate, burdened by more than just saddlebags. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and his hat sagged under the weight of weather and wear. Blood had dried on the collar of his shirt, some of it his. The town of Crossford lay just ahead, its buildings crouched like tired men around the single dirt road that served as its spine. Most days, the place was quiet. A handful of ranchers, a blacksmith who worked more with whiskey than iron, and a preacher whose faith was loud but empty. But that evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the town watched. Curtains twitched. Voices dropped. The saloon doors swung open, then stilled. Everyone noticed the rider, because no one ever came to Crossford unless they were running from something or toward it. He dismounted without a word, boots crunching softly on the sun-baked earth. The horse, a tired sorrel gelding with old scars on its flank, exhaled and dipped its head. The stranger reached up, patting its neck. Then he stepped inside the saloon. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and suspicion. A card game paused. A bottle froze mid-pour. The piano player lifted his hands and slowly closed the lid. The stranger walked to the bar, removed his hat, and placed it carefully on the counter. His hair was dark, damp with sweat, and a long scar ran from his left brow to his cheek, fading into the stubble. "Whiskey," he said, voice like gravel over river rock. The barkeep, a wiry man with a glass eye and a habit of blinking the wrong one, nodded and poured. "You come far?" he asked, not really wanting an answer. The stranger didn't reply. He downed the shot in one swallow, then turned to scan the room. His eyes landed briefly on a woman seated alone near the rear wall. She wore a green dress that had once been elegant, now faded by sun and sorrow. Her eyes met his. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. Just watched. "You got a name, mister?" the barkeep asked, trying again. The stranger placed a silver coin on the bar. "For the drink. Keep the name." A snicker came from the poker table. "Real friendly sort," one of the players muttered, a big man with sleeves rolled to the elbows and a revolver visible on his hip. "Looks like trouble if you ask me." "I didn't," the stranger said, not turning. The laughter died. The air in the saloon shifted, like a storm deciding whether to break. But the woman in green stood then, slowly, and walked toward him. "You're bleeding," she said, nodding to his side. The stranger looked down. A dark stain had spread near his ribs. He swayed slightly, then caught himself. "It's an old problem." "I'm a healer," she said. "Used to be, anyway." He studied her. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? Regret? "I don't trust doctors," he said. "I'm not a doctor," she replied. "I'm worse." He blinked once, then nodded. "Lead the way." They left the saloon together. Behind them, whispers bloomed like weeds in the wake of a storm. Nobody asked where he came from. Nobody asked who she really was. But Crossford had just changed. And it wasn't done changing yet. The woman led him behind the saloon, past a broken fence and a dry well, toward a small house tucked beneath the shadow of a leaning sycamore. It looked like it had been forgotten by time. Shutters crooked, porch boards bowed, a tin roof that sang in the wind. But it was clean. She kept it that way, even if no one ever visited. She opened the door without looking back. "Sit down," she said. The stranger did. The chair creaked under his weight as he eased into it, breathing shallow now. He removed his coat. The wound on his side had reopened. A clean bullet grazed, but deep, ragged, and angry. She knelt beside him, setting out a chipped basin and a bottle of clear liquid. "This will hurt," she warned. He didn't answer, just nodded. She poured the alcohol onto a cloth and pressed it to the wound. He hissed, but didn't flinch. She worked in silence, brow furrowed, hands steady. She had done this before, too many times probably. He watched her, even as pain clouded his vision. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She didn't answer right away. "Clara," she said at last. "Used to be Clara Barnes. Doesn't mean much anymore." He gave the faintest nod. "Used to be Daniel Cole," he said. "Means even less." Clara looked up. "Cole. I've heard that name. Probably not from anyone alive." She didn't press him. When the bleeding slowed, she stitched the skin with practiced hands. The room smelled of rust and whiskey. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls like it was trying to listen in. When she finished, she sat back and wiped her hands. "You'll live, if you rest." I don't have that luxury, he said. She studied him. You being hunted? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of canvas. Inside it was a worn photograph, creased, faded, barely visible. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, standing beside a woman whose eyes looked like Clara's, though she knew they weren't hers. She's missing, Daniel said. Taken 3 days ago. Clara felt her chest tighten. You think she's in Crossford? I think someone in Crossford knows where she went. She leaned back. You're not here to rest. You're here for a reckoning. I'm here for the truth, he said quietly. But I'll settle for justice if I have to. Clara stood and lit a lantern, the glow flickering across her face. Then you're going to need more than stitches. Daniel looked up at her. You offering help? No, she said. I'm offering a map. The map was old, hand-drawn, edges burnt, stained with something darker than coffee. Clara unrolled it across the table, smoothing it with both palms. Her fingers lingered on one corner, near a spot marked with a faded cross. That's Black Hollow, she said. Used to be a mine. Closed after a cave-in 15 years back. But lately, folks say there's been movement again. Lights. Sounds. Whispers. She tapped the cross with her index finger. If someone's keeping secrets in these parts, they're likely keeping them there. Daniel leaned forward, studying the sketch. Who owns it now? She hesitated. Technically, no one. But practically, Judd Ramsey. Daniel's jaw tightened. That name I do know. Clara's eyes narrowed. You got history with him. More like debts, he said. Unpaid and unforgotten. Ramsey had once been a Pinkerton agent before greed chewed up his morals and spit out something twisted. He ran half the freight lines in the territory now, and the other half paid him not to interfere. Men went missing around him. So did women. So did children. You think he took the girl? Clara asked. Daniel's voice came low. I think he sells what he can't use. Clara looked away. Then you're going to need more than bullets. Ramsey owns the sheriff. Owns the saloon. Half the men in this town answer to him, even if they don't wear his name. Daniel stood, steady despite the blood drying on his side. Then I'll start with the half that don't. Clara stepped in front of him. You'll get killed walking in there alone. Maybe, he said, but I won't ride away without her. Silence fell. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and wind pushed against the house like it meant to knock it down. Finally, Clara spoke. You've got until sundown tomorrow, she said. That's when Ramsey's men do their run to the ridge. If she's being moved, it'll be then. Daniel looked at her. Why are you helping me? She didn't answer at first. Then, because I had a daughter once. She didn't come back. His eyes softened. Just for a second. Clara walked to a cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a revolver in a leather holster. She laid it on the table beside the map. You'll want this, she said. Shoots straight. Kicks like a mule. Daniel picked it up, spun the chamber, and holstered it in one fluid motion. Thank you, he said. Clara gave a bitter smile. Don't thank me yet. The next morning dawned brittle and gray, the sky stretched thin, like old linen. Daniel rode out just after sunup, Clara's map folded in his coat, and the borrowed revolver tight against his hip. The streets of Crossford were waking slowly, merchants unlocking shutters, horses stamping frost from their hooves, and two boys throwing stones at a frozen water trough. He passed the sheriff's office without slowing. Inside, he saw Sheriff Harlan slumped in his chair, boots propped on a desk littered with empty bottles. No badge in sight, no law either. Just before leaving town, Daniel stopped at the blacksmith's barn. The place reeked of ash and oil, but he wasn't here for a horseshoe. Inside, the blacksmith, Elias Croft, glanced up from his anvil, eyes narrowing. Well, I'll be, Croft muttered. Figured you were dead. Been close, Daniel replied. Croft wiped his hands. You back for her? Daniel just nodded. Ramsey won't let her go easy. You know that. I'm not asking. Croft stared at him a moment longer, then motioned toward a crate. Took this off a dead bounty hunter last fall. Figured you might come back for it. Inside the crate lay a sawed-off shotgun and a belt of shells. Daniel took both without a word, strapping them on over his coat. Try not to die this time, Croft said. No promises. Daniel rode west toward Black Hollow. The land grew more brittle with each mile. Trees stripped bare, grass turned gray, the earth itself scarred like something old and angry had clawed through it. The entrance to the hollow was marked by 2 broken posts and a rusted chain, more symbol than barrier. He dismounted, tying the horse to a cedar stump, and moved forward on foot. The mine lay ahead, gaping and silent. 2 shacks stood near its mouth, both with fresh footprints leading in and out. He crouched low, checking the tracks. 3 men, maybe 4. Recent. Inside one shack, he found a half-empty bottle of gin, a tin plate with beans gone cold, and a ledger. He flipped it open. Names, dates, codes, prices. His gut clenched. Ramsey wasn't just taking people, he was selling them. A sound behind him. Daniel whirled, shotgun raised. A man stood in the doorway, rifle in hand. "You ain't supposed to be here," the guard growled. Daniel fired. The blast was deafening. The man dropped without a sound. Daniel moved fast now. Into the second shack, empty. Then toward the mine entrance. Just before he reached it, a low voice called out from the shadows. "She's not down there." Daniel spun, gun up. A boy, maybe 16, stepped out from behind a crate. Thin, dirty, trembling. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "They moved her," the boy whispered. "Last night. Ramsey sent her east with the others. Said they'd fetch more in Bisbee." Daniel's breath caught. "Where?" "Old Canyon Trail," the boy said. "Before the ridge splits." Daniel backed away. "You saw this?" The boy nodded. "She was crying. Called out for someone. Said your name." That was all Daniel needed. He turned and ran. By noon, the sun had broken through the clouds, but the warmth didn't reach Daniel's skin. He galloped east along the canyon trail, eyes scanning the ridgelines, his heart pounding with every hoofbeat. If the boy was right, Ramsey's men would already be half a day ahead, with the girl and maybe others. The trail narrowed into hard rock and switchbacks, winding along a jagged cliffside. To the north, the land dropped away into scrub and sage. To the south, a vast stretch of flat land shimmered under the sun, blurred by heat and dust. Somewhere out there, she was being moved like freight, sold, traded, erased. Daniel leaned low over the saddle, coaxing every ounce of speed from the gelding. He knew this land, knew where they'd stop for water, for rest. And he knew how Ramsey operated, always cautious, always armed, always 2 steps ahead unless someone bled to catch up. By mid-afternoon, he reached a split in the trail and dismounted. He checked the dust, fresh prints, wagon wheels, and horses. 6 riders at least. Heavy load. They were close. Too close to hesitate. He followed on foot now, shotgun in hand, weaving through mesquite and boulders. The sun threw long shadows across the rocks, and the wind began to change, cooler, faster, bringing with it the scent of sweat, smoke, and something more. Voices. He crept forward and saw them. A makeshift camp nestled in the low pass, 3 wagons, 6 horses, and 5 armed men gathered near a fire. One wagon was covered with a canvas sheet. Beneath it, Daniel saw movement. Small, quiet. Someone curled up, wrists bound. The girl. She was alive. Daniel stepped behind a juniper bush and pulled the revolver Clara had given him. He counted breaths, counted men, calculated. One guard was walking perimeter, another leaned against a crate. The others were eating. He moved fast. The first man dropped with a sharp crack of pistol fire. The second turned, mouth open to shout, but Daniel was already on him, the butt of the shotgun crushing bone. Panic exploded. Gunfire lit the canyon. Daniel dove for cover as bullets splintered rock beside him. He returned fire, quick and clean. 2 more shots, 2 more men down. The last turned to run, stumbling for his horse. Daniel fired once more. The man crumpled. Silence returned, thick and humming. Daniel stood slowly, ears ringing. Smoke drifted above the fire pit. One horse bolted, reins flapping. Then, movement under the wagon tarp. He rushed forward, yanking the canvas aside. The girl stared up at him, eyes wide and terrified. Dirty, bruised, but breathing. "Ellie," said softly. She blinked. "Ellie, it's me." A moment passed. Then, "Daddy?" His heart cracked wide. He lifted her into his arms. "I've got you," he whispered. "No one's taking you again." Daniel didn't waste time burying the dead. He took their weapons, loosed the remaining horses, and set fire to the wagons. Let the flames tell Ramsey what silence could not. Someone had come, and he was not done. He wrapped Ellie in his coat and hoisted her onto the saddle in front of him. She held on tight, burying her face in his chest, small fingers clinging like roots to bark. She hadn't spoken another word since the first. They rode west, back toward Crossford, sticking to low ground and shaded paths. Daniel kept one eye on the sky and the other on the trail behind. He knew what came next. Ramsey wouldn't mourn his men. He'd hunt their killer. By nightfall, they reached Clara's cabin. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The porch lamp was lit. And there, standing in the doorway, was Clara, rifle in hand, eyes sharp in the amber glow. She stepped down when she saw the girl. "Is she?" "She's safe," Daniel said. "For now." Clara nodded and opened the door. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave. Ellie hesitated at first, then let go of Daniel and stepped inside. Her movements were slow, unsure, as if she feared the floor might vanish under her feet. Clara knelt to her level, offering a warm towel and a cup of milk. Daniel watched them from the threshold. Later, after Ellie had been bathed and fed and tucked into Clara's narrow bed, Daniel stepped out onto the porch. The stars were out now, brittle and cold, hung over the land like eyes that never closed. Clara joined him, pulling her shawl tight. "You lit a fire out there," she said. "She was in a cage," he replied. "That's all I needed to see." Clara looked at him. "And what now? You think Ramsey's going to just walk away from this?" "No," Daniel said. "He'll come." She sighed. "Then we need to be ready." He turned to her, voice steady. "I didn't bring war to your door, Clara, but I won't run from it either." "You're not the only one who lost a child," she said, eyes shining now. "You want to protect her, we fight together." Daniel nodded once. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching as a dark column of smoke began to rise on the horizon, far off, but not far enough. Ramsey had found the ashes, and he was coming. By morning, Crossford buzzed with nervous energy. Word of the burned wagons had already reached town, carried by a trapper who'd spotted the smoke and rode straight in to warn the saloon. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they knew Ramsey would come looking. And when he came, he wouldn't ask nicely. Clara stood at the cabin window, watching dust stir in the distance. Ellie sat quietly at the table, tracing invisible shapes in the wood with one finger, her face pale but calm. Daniel paced the room, checking his revolver, then the shotgun. "How many men does Ramsey usually bring on a show of force?" Clara didn't look at him. 5, maybe 6. Depends how insulted he feels. "I killed 5, Daniel said. Clara finally turned. "Then expect 10. Daniel holstered the revolver. "We need allies." "Croft," she said. "The blacksmith. He owes me more than he admits." "I'll go," Daniel said. "I already sent word," Clara replied. "He'll be here by sundown." True to her word, Elias Croft arrived just as the shadows lengthened. He brought more than a hammer this time, 2 rifles, a saddlebag full of shells, and an old Navy Colt with a cracked ivory grip. "Never liked Ramsey," Croft said as he stepped off his horse. "Always fancied himself a king. Let's see how he bleeds." They spent the evening preparing. Clara reinforced the cabin shutters and laid out a stash of bandages and boiled water. Croft set traps along the tree line, tripwires, sharpened spikes, anything that might slow a charge. Daniel worked in silence, his every motion crisp and final, like a man tightening the last knots before a storm. Ellie slept in Clara's room, curled beneath 2 quilts, a small carving Croft had given her clutched in one hand. She hadn't asked about her mother yet, and Daniel hadn't told her. Some truths needed time. Night fell heavy and cold. The 3 of them sat in the cabin's main room, oil lamp burning low. "You sure about this?" Croft asked. "No," Daniel said, "but I'm not leaving her behind again." Clara sipped black coffee, her face unreadable. "He'll come at dawn. He always does." Outside, the wind stilled. The trees stood like sentries. And somewhere far off, a coyote cried out once and fell silent. Inside, 3 guns waited in the dark. And on the porch, Daniel drew a line in the dirt with the toe of his boot. "Let him cross it," he said softly. Dawn crept over the horizon slow and blood-red. The prairie breathed frost, and the first birds didn't sing. It was the kind of morning where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Daniel stood outside the cabin, coat pulled tight, hat low over his brow. The shotgun hung across his back, the revolver ready at his side. His eyes scanned the distance, miles of nothing, then dust, rising like smoke from east. "They're coming," he said without turning. Clara stepped out behind him, rifle in hand, lips pressed thin. "Croft's out back," she said. "He'll cover the side window. If they split, we cut them down at the porch." Daniel nodded. The dust grew closer, shaping itself into forms, 6 riders, maybe 7, dressed in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats, silhouettes as sharp as bone against the rising sun. At their front rode a man tall in the saddle, his duster trailing like a flag behind him. Judd Ramsey. He didn't slow when he reached the clearing. His horse stopped just short of the porch, hooves stamping once before going still. The others fanned out behind him, quiet, calculated. Ramsey removed his gloves finger by finger, then looked up at Daniel. "You've made a mess," he said calmly. Daniel didn't blink. "Cleaning one." Ramsey glanced toward the cabin. "Is the girl in there?" "She's not going anywhere." Ramsey smiled, but it was thin and joyless. "You think you can outgun me?" "No," Daniel replied. "I think you brought the wrong men." One of Ramsey's riders shifted nervously. Another coughed. Ramsey leaned forward in the saddle. "That girl was mine to trade. You took her. You burned my stock. You spilled my blood." Daniel didn't argue. "You're not a lawman," Ramsey continued. "You've got no claim. You're just a ghost. A broken soldier chasing what's already gone." Daniel's voice dropped to a low growl. "I'm a father, and I've had enough taken." Ramsey sighed. "I gave you a chance." Then he raised his hand. Clara fired first. The shot clipped Ramsey's shoulder, spinning him slightly in the saddle. Gunfire erupted. The porch exploded in splinters. Daniel dropped behind the rail and fired, dropping one man instantly. Croft's rifle barked from the back. Another rider fell, screaming. Ramsey's horse reared. He shouted for cover, blood running down his coat. 2 of his men turned and bolted. A third charged the cabin, revolver blazing. Daniel met him at the steps, fired once point-blank. The man collapsed without a sound. Smoke filled the air. The scent of gunpowder choked the breeze. Then silence. Daniel stood slowly, blood on his coat, smoke rising from the barrel of his revolver. Ramsey lay in the dirt, one leg twisted, clutching his arm. "Do it," Ramsey spat. "Be the butcher they say you are." Daniel walked to him, calm as a storm's eye. "No," he said. "Let them see what mercy looks like." He turned and walked back to the cabin. Ramsey screamed behind him, not in pain, but in rage. Croft emerged from the trees, rifle slung over his shoulder, face pale. Clara stepped out with Ellie behind her, the girl's eyes wide and glistening. "It's over," Clara whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet." The bodies were buried by noon, 3 shallow graves just beyond the tree line, marked only by rocks and silence. Clara handled the digging with quiet purpose. Croft said little, wiping sweat and blood from his brow between shovelfuls. Daniel stood watch, eyes never leaving the horizon, hands still twitching with leftover adrenaline. Ramsey was gone. Not dead, just gone. He'd limped off with a busted arm and hate burning in his gut, vowing to return with fire and judges and signatures. Daniel let him go. Killing him would have made him a martyr. Letting him crawl back broken? That was a different kind of punishment. Inside the cabin, Ellie slept fitfully, one hand curled around the wooden bird Croft had given her, the other tucked beneath her cheek. She hadn't spoken since the fight, hadn't cried either. She was holding everything inside, just like her father. That evening, Clara sat on the porch with a pot of coffee between her hands, watching the wind play in the grass. Daniel joined her, dropping onto the steps beside her, back sore, shoulder throbbing. "Town knows by now," she said. "Let them," Daniel replied. "Ramsey won't wait long. He'll bring papers next time. Badges. Claims." Daniel sipped his coffee. "Let him try." Croft appeared at the edge of the yard, a bundle of tools slung over his shoulder. "I'm heading back," he said. "Smithy won't run itself." Daniel stood. "I owe you." "You owe me nothing," Croft replied. "You saved a child. I'd trade steel for that any day." He nodded once to Clara, tipped his hat to Ellie through the window, and vanished down the road. As dusk fell, Daniel found himself walking the fence line. His boots crunched on loose gravel, his mind heavier than the rifle slung across his back. Clara joined him halfway. "You're not staying," she said. He looked at her. "I don't know where to go." "Then don't go." Silence stretched between them, soft and weighted. "I spent years chasing the wrong things," he said finally. "Now I've got her back, and I don't know how to be what she needs." Clara studied him. "You show up. You stay. That's more than most men do." He exhaled, shaky. "And if Ramsey comes again?" Clara reached into her coat and handed him a folded piece of paper. "A deed. "To the land," she said. "It's yours now, legally." He stared at it. "Why?" "Because ghosts don't plant roots," she said. "But maybe you're not a ghost anymore." Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he walked back to the cabin, opened the door, and sat beside Ellie as she stirred from sleep. "I'm here," he whispered. She didn't say a word, just reached for his hand. Outside, the last light of day sank below the hills, and the wind finally carried no scent of smoke. 2 weeks passed. Ramsey didn't return. Not with lawyers. Not with men. Not even with threats. But Crossford changed. The saloon quieted when Daniel walked through the door. The sheriff started showing up sober, and people began tipping their hats to Clara again. Not kindly, just less cruelly. Daniel worked the land by day, repairing the corral, mending fences, tilling dry soil that hadn't felt a plow in years. It was hard, stubborn earth. But so was he. Ellie spent her days with Clara, helping grind flour, feed chickens, and hang linens in the breeze. She spoke more now, soft things, simple things. Her favorite color, her mother's humming, her dreams of a red pony. But she never spoke about what Ramsey's men had done. And Daniel never asked. Some pain, he knew, had to come out slow, like winter thawing from the bones. One morning, while splitting wood near the tree line, Daniel spotted movement at the ridge. A rider. Alone. He tensed, hand to his revolver, but the figure rode slow, cautious, and wore no weapon. As they neared, Daniel saw it was a woman, maybe 30, with a broad-brimmed hat and a courier's bag strapped across her shoulder. She dismounted with a tired grunt and held out a sealed envelope. "For you," she said. Daniel opened it on the porch, Clara and Ellie standing beside him. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no seal, just words, written in an elegant, practiced hand. "Consider your debt repaid. The girl was never mine to trade. You made that clear. I'll not challenge you again, not out of mercy, but because I only wage wars I can win. Gr." Below the signature was a wax mark, a broken spur. Daniel folded the note and burned it in Clara's stove. "You won't bother us," he said. Clara studied him. "You believe that?" "No," Daniel said, "but I'm not waiting for him anymore." That night, Clara handed Ellie a journal with a blank first page. "Write what you remember," she told her. "Then write what you want to become." Ellie blinked at her, confused. "So the past doesn't write it for you," Clara added. Outside, Daniel hammered a new signpost into the dirt at the edge of the cabin path. He carved it himself with steady hands. Cole Homestead. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The days that followed were strange in their peace. Daniel awoke before the sun each morning, stirred coffee over a wood stove, and stood in silence as the land slowly woke up with him. There were no gunshots now, no hoofbeats pounding in the distance. Just the creak of trees, the soft cluck of hens, and the faint voice of Ellie reading from her journal in the other room. She'd started writing every night, just as Clara suggested. Sometimes one sentence, sometimes a full page. She never shared what she wrote, and Daniel never asked. But the way she slept deeper now, the way her voice didn't shake when she spoke, that was enough. Clara stayed, though she never said why. She worked in the mornings, wandered the woods in the afternoons, and returned with herbs or roots or sometimes nothing at all but stories from when she was a girl. Stories about her father teaching her how to trap rabbits, or how her mother used to sing while stringing beans. They'd sit on the porch after supper, the three of them, while the sun turned gold over the ridge. One evening, Clara brought out a small tin box and set it between them. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "My past," she said, lifting the lid. Inside were a few scraps of memory, a faded ribbon, a photograph of 2 children by a stream, a silver wedding band. She took the ring out and held it in her palm. "I buried him with nothing," she said. "Kept this so I'd remember the weight." Daniel didn't speak. He just nodded, slowly. Clara turned to Ellie. "When you're older, you'll carry your own box. Just don't let it fill with regrets." Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden bird. "I'm keeping this," she said. "It's not heavy." That made Clara smile. That night, as crickets sang and the moon climbed like a lantern over the hills, Daniel stepped outside alone. He walked to the ridge beyond the corral and stood there a long time, watching the dark spill over the land. He didn't expect to find joy here, but he hadn't expected to survive either. A breeze stirred the tall grass, cool against his skin. Behind him, in the quiet glow of the cabin windows, were 2 people who hadn't given up on the world. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was everything. It was nearly a month before anyone mentioned the name Ramsey again. Daniel had just finished rebuilding the barn roof when Sheriff Harlan rode up the lane. He wasn't drunk this time. He wasn't smirking either. Just tired, and carrying a folded letter in his gloved hand. "Figured you should see this," he said, dismounting. "Came in from Bisbee." Daniel took the letter and opened it slowly. It was brief. Just a note from a marshal's office. Judd Ramsey was found dead. Gunshot to the head. No suspects. No witnesses. Body left by the river. Daniel read it twice, then handed it back. "He's gone," Harlan said. Daniel nodded. "So why do you look uneasy?" The sheriff scratched at his stubbled jaw. "Because men like Ramsey don't die quiet. Somebody helped him vanish, until they didn't." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he looked out toward the horizon, where the wind stirred dust across the low trails. After a long pause, Harlan said, "Whatever you're building here, keep building it. And if anyone else comes looking to make trouble, send word. Some of us remember what decent looks like." Daniel gave a quiet nod. The sheriff mounted up and rode off. Later that night, Clara found Daniel on the porch again, his gaze distant. "Ramsey," she asked, "dead. You believe it?" "I believe someone wanted him gone worse than I did." She sat beside him, silent for a while. "Does it change anything?" she asked finally. "No," Daniel said, "but it ends something." The next morning, Ellie left early with Clara, heading to town to trade herbs and cloth for coffee and soap. Daniel stayed behind to mend the eastern fence. The sun was just peeking over the ridgeline when he spotted something in the dust by the trail, hoof prints. Not old, not many, just one rider. He followed the prints 100 yards before finding it, a cairn of stones beneath the ash tree near the bend. Freshly stacked. Not a grave. A message. At its base, a single object lay resting, a bronze spur, broken at the neck. Daniel crouched, picked it up, and turned it in his palm. There were no initials, no markings, but he knew exactly who left it. "Not justice," he murmured, "but something close." He buried the spur beneath the cairn and walked back to the cabin with the wind at his back, the land quiet, and his shadow long behind him. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came fast. Rain swept over the plains in silver sheets, filling the creeks and greening the hills. Wildflowers burst through the scorched patches Ramsey's riders had once trampled. The earth, it seemed, had forgiven faster than the people. Daniel worked from dawn to dusk, clearing brush, planting rows of corn and beans, fixing the wagon axles. He built a second room onto the cabin, small but sturdy, with windows that caught the morning light. Ellie called it hers the moment the first board went up. Clara handled the garden and the still room, drying roots and petals, brewing her strange, bitter teas. Town folks started knocking on her door again, quietly, humbly, when fever took their children or when births came too soon. She never turned them away, but she never forgot either. One morning, Ellie burst through the door, cheeks pink with wind, and something deeper. "There's a school starting in town," she said breathlessly. "Miss Ruth is opening one in the old church." Daniel looked up from the table. "You want to go?" Ellie nodded slowly. "I think I do." He smiled. "Then you will." That afternoon, they rode together to the edge of Crossford. The church had been repaired, new windows, a clean white coat of paint. Daniel watched as Ellie stepped inside, clutching her journal like a shield. She didn't look back. Clara joined him at the fence. "She's not afraid anymore," Clara said. "She's braver than I ever was," Daniel replied. They stood there for a long time, watching dust blow across the road and chickens peck in the tall grass beyond the fields. The town wasn't healed, not fully, but it was quieter now. Softer. Back at the homestead, Daniel added the final plank to the barn door. Then he climbed onto the roof and sat, legs dangling, watching the horizon turn gold. He thought of war, of trails gone cold, of blood soaking into the sand. He thought of the woman he'd lost, the men he'd killed, the child he'd found again. And finally he thought of tomorrow, not as a place to escape, but a place to grow. Because something had begun here. Something real. Something worth keeping. The rhythm of peace had finally settled in. Days were measured not by fear, but by chores and sun. Ellie walked to school, most mornings with her satchel swinging and a trail of dust blooming behind her steps. She came home with ink-stained fingers and stories about spelling bees, arithmetic, and a boy who dared to pull her braid once and never tried again. Daniel watched her grow braver by the day. But even peace, he knew, had shadows. One evening, as he returned from the far pasture, he saw the horse. It stood alone on the ridge, riderless, black as night, saddle worn, reins dragging like a snake's tongue behind it. Daniel froze. No smoke, no hoofbeats, no shouts, just the horse watching. He approached slowly, hand on his revolver. The animal didn't flinch. There was something familiar in its stillness. And then he saw it, carved faintly into the leather of the saddle horn. EC, his brother's initials. Ezra Cole, dead these last 6 years, or so Daniel had believed. Lost in the dust of some failed rebellion or a prison yard somewhere far from home. Daniel reached out, took the reins, and guided the horse down the trail. At the cabin, Clara met him with narrowed eyes. "Where's the rider?" "There wasn't one," Daniel said, "but I know who it belonged to." Clara didn't press. That night, Daniel sat by the fire long after Ellie had gone to bed. He ran his fingers over the saddle, remembering the last time he'd seen Ezra. Younger, wilder, always chasing some cause he didn't fully understand. "If you're alive," Daniel muttered into the flames, "don't come here. Not unless you're done running." Clara looked up from her sewing. "You turn him away?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but I won't let him burn down what we've built." She nodded once. "Fair." In the distance, coyotes sang. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, from memory. 3 days passed before the man himself arrived. Ezra Cole came at sunset, riding a lean bay horse with a crooked gait and dust thick in the folds of his coat. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but Daniel would have known him blind. Same broad shoulders, same proud slouch, same eyes like blue steel hammered under fire. Daniel met him halfway down the lane, arms crossed, boots planted. Ezra pulled his horse to a stop and tipped his hat back. "Well," he said, "you didn't shoot me on sight. I'll take that as kinship." Daniel didn't smile. Could have shot the horse instead. Ezra dismounted with a grunt. Would have deserved it. They stared at each other for a long moment, two ghosts pretending they weren't. Then Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his brother. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Inside the cabin, Clara watched through the window. Ellie peeked from behind her skirt. "Who is that?" the girl asked. "Family," Clara said. "The kind you don't invite, just survive." Over supper, the three of them sat in a silence sharpened by years. Ezra spoke first. "I heard about the girl. About Ramsey. Thought you might need help cleaning up what's left." "You're late," Daniel said. Ezra shrugged. "I was west, chasing ghosts. I buried mine." Ezra set down his cup. "I didn't come to fight. Just needed to see if there was still something of you left." "There is," Daniel said, "but it's not for sale." "I'm not here to take," Ezra replied. "I've done enough of that." Clara stood then, clearing plates. "You want a bed, you build one. Tools are in the barn." Ezra raised a brow. "She always like that." Daniel nodded. "And she's the reason we're still breathing." That night, as the fire burned low, the brothers sat outside on the porch. Ezra rolled a cigarette with fingers that trembled slightly. War or whiskey? Daniel wasn't sure which. "Everything's different," Ezra said. "You this land. Even the wind. That's how it's supposed to be." Ezra looked up at the stars. "Think there's a place for someone like me here?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "If you're willing to earn it." Ezra took a long drag and exhaled. "Then I'll start tomorrow." The silence that followed was easier. For once, it didn't feel like something waiting to break. Ezra stayed. Not long enough to unpack his past, but long enough to start mending fences, both literal and otherwise. He was up with the sun, hauling water, chopping wood, checking the traps Clara had laid along the creek. He never asked questions about Ellie, and Daniel didn't offer explanations. But one afternoon, Ezra handed her a pocket knife with a carved handle and said simply, "For when you need to cut away what won't let go." Ellie took it without a word. Clara watched him carefully. Not with fear, just wariness, like she was measuring how many cracks still ran through the man. "He's not who he was," Daniel told her one night. "And you're sure that's a good thing?" she replied. Daniel didn't answer. Ezra's presence changed the rhythm of the place. The chores went faster. The silence felt fuller. Even Ellie started to laugh more, quiet, sudden bursts like small fires catching. She followed him around the yard sometimes, asking how to tie knots or sharpen a stick into a fishing spear. He called her kid, and never looked uncomfortable when she flinched at thunder or shadow. But Daniel still waited for the catch. The secret. It came one evening near the edge of the pasture, where Ezra was digging a post hole. Daniel handed him a jug of water and leaned on the shovel. "You didn't come just to visit," he said. Ezra paused, then sighed. "No. What is it?" Ezra stared at the dirt. "There's a man in New Canaan, Clay Broderick. He's raising something ugly. Mercenaries. Riders. Claims he's building a township, but it's more like a fortress. Buying up land, running families off. Folks say he's looking west." Daniel's face hardened. "And I rode with him. Years ago. Back when I was too dumb to know better. He'll come through here eventually. You'll need to be ready." "You came to warn me." Ezra looked at him then. "I came to stop running. Maybe start standing for something." Daniel studied him a long time, then nodded once. "Then we build faster." That night, he told Clara. "He's not just passing through," Daniel said. "Trouble's riding behind him." Clara didn't flinch. "Then we plant deeper roots." They stood together in the dark, listening to the wind rake across the hills, and knew the land they called home would not stay quiet forever. But they wouldn't run. Not this time. It was just after the first frost that the riders came. 3 of them. Not a war party yet, but scouts, the kind sent ahead like fingers feeling out a wound. Their coats were black, their boots polished. They rode like men who never built a thing in their lives, only broke what others had. Daniel spotted them from the ridge, where he was clearing brush. He watched them approach the house, slow and sure, their eyes never leaving the porch. Clara stood in the doorway, rifle in hand but lowered. Ezra stepped out beside her, his coat unbuttoned, revolver visible. Daniel didn't hurry. He didn't need to. Men like that thrived on fear, and he had none left to give. By the time he reached them, the lead rider had already dismounted. His face was smooth young, but his eyes were old and cold. "Name's Burke," he said, offering a smile that didn't touch his mouth. "Representing Mr. Clay Broderick of New Canaan. We're expanding west. Your land's in our line." Daniel didn't shake the offered hand. "It's not for sale." Burke nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "See, that's unfortunate. Mr. Broderick's puttin' up fences, schools, churches. He's bringing order to wild places." Ezra barked a laugh. "He's bringing blood and fire. Don't dress it up." Burke didn't look at him. "This isn't your concern, sir." Ezra stepped forward, eyes sharp. "It is now." Burke turned back to Daniel. "We'll be back, with paper and witnesses." Daniel met his gaze. "Bring more than paper." Burke smiled again. "No need for threats." That wasn't one. The 3 men rode off slowly, kicking up dust in deliberate spirals. No gunfire. Not yet. Just promises carved into the horizon. Inside, Ellie stood by the window, fists clenched at her sides. "Are they bad men?" she asked. Daniel knelt beside her. "They are." "Will they come back?" "Yes." She nodded. "Then I'll be ready." That night, Daniel gathered Clara and Ezra around the fire. "They'll come in weeks. Maybe less," he said. "We hold the ridge," Ezra replied. "And we find allies." Clara opened a chest under the floorboards. Inside, a long-barreled rifle, wrapped in oilcloth, and 6 boxes of ammunition. "I've been ready longer than you think," she said. And outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the scent of pine, of frost, and the bitter smoke of a new storm brewing far to the east. The next morning, Ezra saddled up before sunrise. "If Broderick's reaching west," he said, tightening the straps, "we're not the only ones he's threatening. Time to find folks who remember what it was like before men like him wrote the law." "You think they'll fight?" Daniel asked, standing by the gate. "They won't have a choice soon," Ezra said. "But they'll need a reason. We can give them one." He rode east, dust trailing behind him, a rifle strapped across his back, and a list of names in his coat pocket, names of men who owed him favors, and a few who just wanted their land left alone. Back at the homestead, Daniel focused on defense. He and Clara walked the perimeter, marking high ground and digging trenches. They turned the barn into a fallback shelter, stacked crates of dried goods, stored clean water in barrels. At night, Ellie practiced loading shells at the table, small fingers moving with quiet focus. She didn't flinch at the metallic clicks anymore. "Do you want her to learn this?" Clara asked softly one evening. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at the open journal beside her. "I want her to survive." Word came on the wind. By the end of the week, messages arrived from all across the territory. Riders came in twos and threes, an old rancher with 2 sons, a widow who carried her husband's Winchester like a holy relic, 3 brothers from the foothills, their knuckles raw from recent brawls. Each of them had a story. Each had been touched by Broderick's hand, burned out, fenced off, taxed until they bled. Each said the same thing: "We won't run again." They camped in the low meadow by the creek, out of sight from the road. Clara cooked stew in a pot that never emptied. Ellie helped sort bullets by size and weight. Daniel walked the line each night, making sure every sentry had fresh eyes and a steady hand. One night, Ezra returned. He rode into camp quietly, nodded to every man who saluted him, and found Daniel near the cabin. "I found 20, Ezra said, voice gravel-thick. 10 more on the way." "You bring hell with you," Daniel replied. Ezra smirked. "You'd rather face it alone." Daniel clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Not anymore." That night, the campfires glowed like stars fallen to earth. Men laughed in low voices, shared tobacco, sharpened blades. The smell of gun oil and pine filled the dark. War was coming, but so was a reckoning. They came just after dawn. No warning, no declaration, just the low rumble of hooves and the rising cloud of dust stretching across the eastern horizon like a storm with teeth. Clay Broderick brought 30 riders. Men in long coats, faces covered in scarves, rifles across their backs, and pistols ready at their hips. They didn't come to talk. They came to take. Daniel stood at the front of the homestead, hat low, shotgun slung over his shoulder. Beside him, Ezra, grim and silent. Clara was positioned near the barn, rifle braced against a crate. Ellie stayed inside with 2 others, tucked in the cellar beneath the cabin floor, safe but not hidden. The riders fanned out across the field, Broderick at the center. He looked nothing like Ramsey. Where Ramsey had been a smirking vulture, Broderick was a machine. Polished boots, clean gloves, a look in his eyes that said he didn't fear God or man because he didn't see them as different. "You had your warning," he called out. "This land belongs to the future." Daniel didn't move. Then the future's going to have to bleed for it. Broderick's hand twitched. The first shot came from the ridge, a crack like thunder. One of Broderick's men dropped, gurgling, before he hit the ground. Then the field erupted. Gunfire tore the silence to shreds. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Bullets tore through trees and fence posts. Smoke rose in thick, gray pillars. Daniel fired, reloaded, fired again. He saw Clara drop 2 men with clean, cold shots before shifting position behind the water trough. Ezra waded into the chaos like a man chasing penance, his revolver singing with every pull of the trigger. Broderick's men pushed hard, but they were outnumbered now, outmatched by resolve and grit. Daniel's allies had come with purpose, with loss behind their eyes and justice in their blood. They didn't fight like defenders. They fought like people who had been robbed of too much. By midday, the field was a grave. Only 5 of Broderick's men fled, their horses limping, their weapons empty. Broderick himself was dragged from his saddle, one leg shattered, a bullet through his side. Daniel stood over him. "You tried to buy everything," he said, "but you can't own what you don't understand." Broderick coughed blood. "You think this ends with me?" "No," Daniel said, crouching, "but you do." He stood, turned away, and walked. Ezra was leaning against a broken cart, shoulder grazed, hat gone, smile faint. "Not bad for farmers," he muttered. Daniel nodded. They'd won, but they hadn't celebrated. Not yet. The battle was over, but its echoes lingered. Smoke drifted low over the fields where blood had mingled with mud. Buzzards circled high above the ridge, lazy in the morning heat. The scent of gunpowder still clung to the wind. Daniel walked the homestead slowly that day, his boots heavy, his mind quiet. Every post he passed, every broken fence, every scorch mark on the ground, each one told a part of what had happened, what they had survived. Ezra sat outside the barn, arm in a sling, carving a length of wood into something that might one day become a cane or a weapon. He looked up as Daniel approached. "You sleep at all?" Daniel shook his head. "Didn't feel right." Ezra nodded. "Funny how winning don't feel like peace." Daniel looked out over the ridge. "Peace has to be grown, same as anything else. Hard, slow, stubborn." Ezra smirked. "Sounds like you." Inside the cabin, Clara cleaned rifles with quiet precision. Ellie sat beside her, threading a needle through a tear in a blanket. She hummed as she worked, softly, without fear. That was new. Daniel stepped inside and pulled a folded paper from his coat, one of Broderick's manifest lists recovered from the body of a rider. Names, coordinates, families marked for removal. "We send copies," Clara said without looking up. "Let the others know." Daniel nodded. "We'll warn them before it comes." "Before," she agreed. Later that week, men and women from the surrounding valleys rode in, not to fight but to say thanks. Some brought seeds, others tools. One brought a guitar and played into the dusk while children danced barefoot in the long grass. The Cole homestead became more than a cabin. It became a sign that some places would not bow, that some families built or found could stand like stone. Daniel added a new beam to the gatepost, carving it deep with a knife. Home was worth the fire. And each night, as the stars blinked open above the hills, he would sit beside his daughter and listen to her stories, ones she wrote in her journal now, with ink-stained fingers and a voice steady as the earth beneath their feet. Because the West never gave anything freely, but remembered those who dared to stay.